Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, is this the candidate who could decide the U.S. election?
If you vote for either of those candidates, you are endorsing genocide and you are enabling it. Do not make a deal with the devil here. We actually have a way forward.
With just days to go before the vote, we speak to Green Party candidate Jill Stein on why she's running for president. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Welcome to The Take, Dr. Stein. It is really good to have you here for this conversation. We are just days away from the U.S. election, an election many are calling one of the most consequential of our time. But you've been here before, running in 2012 and 2016. This year, you are again running against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump and a newer opponent, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris. Vice President Harris gave her closing argument this week from in front of the White House. Former President Trump held one of his final rallies at the massive Madison Square Garden arena in New York. But you are a third-party candidate in a staunchly two-party system in this country. So what does the week before Election Day look like for you?
It's an intensive week. While the other candidates, the usual candidates from the political elites, have been drilling their message down for the American public for just about a year, if not more. They've had months and months to get their message out. We have only just begun because as a third party, there are so many obstacles to bringing a choice to the American people. In a nutshell, the choice that we bring is an anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker climate action choice, which is actually a choice that the American people are desperate to have. So for us, it's a first opportunity really to tell the American people that a choice is here, a choice that the American people are hungry for, that provides healthcare as a human right, that provides affordable housing as a human right, that will eliminate education debt and medical debt and the climate crisis. It needs our dollars and our support like so many things do. But both political parties, which are bought and paid for by Wall Street and the war machine, are spending over half of our congressional budget on basically that endless war machine, including the genocide going on in Gaza. And this is like the situation that real challengers to the status quo, the war machine, the Wall Street machine, this is what we always face. And this is my third run for this office, and we have never seen anything like this. There is such a groundswell as people wake up to our campaign. In fact, the Democrats who have tried from the very start to throw us off the ballot.
Okay, so you talked about the core issue for so many voters who you've talked to, and that is Israel's war in Gaza and the growing and expanding of that war. You've positioned yourself as the anti-genocide candidate in this election, and you've been incredibly outspoken against Israel's war. You've called for a ceasefire, an arms embargo. In April, you were even arrested at a pro-Palestine rally in St. Louis. When did support for Palestinian rights become a core issue for you?
Let me say that I grew up just after the Holocaust, in a Jewish community, attending a Reform synagogue, singing in the children's choir. And my community was grappling with the question, is there life after genocide? And the dialogue that we had arrived at the solution that we will move forward. We will affirm life after genocide by confirming that we will not allow genocide to happen again, not to anyone. I made my peace with this issue as a child.
You remember formulating that position back then?
Yes. I grew up with the intention to be a social justice advocate and an advocate for human rights and for peace, and that I would be part of that fight against any genocide if I saw a hint of it. I had a strong ethic, really, to become a doctor, to help make peace in the world to help address, the causes of despair, death, and suffering. So I never saw myself having anything to do with politics until I was an activist. I began to see that we cannot change, what ails us unless we address the mother of all illnesses, our sick political system. And that's when I got tricked into running for office by the Green Party. I was not a member of any party prior to that. And, and the Greens, basically we had won public funding for elections, and the Greens came to me and said, "You're already running on all those issues. Why not make it a political campaign and speak to a larger audience?" So I got political out of desperation because nothing else was working.
I want to pause on, because you said you got political out of desperation, and that feels exactly like what this moment is in my own community and what I'm seeing on social media and from the youth, from Muslim Americans, from Arab Americans. So talk to me about how that upbringing and your desperation has turned into what we're seeing now, the anti-genocide candidate.
Yes. So that desperation that drove me to political action was really transformed in the course of conducting an election. And when you run for office, you're kind of public property, and you talk to everybody, and you talk to people on the street, and you talk to people when you're flying in the middle seat on airplanes. And we run a people-powered campaign. So there's really no barrier between me as a candidate and the public. And our events, take place in coffee shops and school auditoriums and, very public places where everyday people are coming. And in fact, they are thronging right now. So our events with 36 hours lead time are absolutely overwhelmed now. It's not only standing room, it's like out the doors, because people are so hungry for this. I was so inspired.
As you said, it's a system. What you learned as an activist, you learned even further as a candidate. So if it's a system, let's say you are elected president, what do you do on day one, day two, that changes this systemic rot, as you're calling it?
Exactly. Fortunately, there are many things that a president can do on the first day that she is in office. And in fact, even before she is inaugurated. If I were to win this election on November 5th, and we can come back to why that is not impossible right now, and we should not be talked into hopelessness and powerlessness about that. The very following morning, I would pick up the phone and I would call Bibi Netanyahu and tell him that his war is over and put it in no uncertain terms, because we are funding this war. We are arming this war. We're providing diplomatic cover and intelligence for this war. So we are in control, just like Ronald Reagan did in 1982 when he picked up the phone and instructed Menachem Begin, then the president, that Israel's war in Lebanon was over. Israel is very much a proxy for the United States. This is our war every bit as much as it is Israel's war. We need to be an adult in the room working with other nations according to international law, human rights, and diplomacy.
You've talked about your position on Gaza, and that is a position that has made you very popular to many Muslim and Arab American voters, as well as the pick of your vice presidential candidate, Professor Butch Weer, a Black Muslim American. But these groups are, of course, not a monolith. And there are some, particularly those in the Syrian American community, who have qualms with what they see as your stance on Syria's civil war, which you have said was coming from a place of the party's view on being non-interventionist. But like Syria, there are other countries with poor human rights records, Russia, China, for instance, where you haven't been as quick or as strong in your condemnation as you have been with the U.S. and with Israel. And it can look like an inconsistency when it comes to foreign policy. And I wonder how you respond to that.
So let me clarify that we have always supported the human rights of people in Russia, in Syria, throughout the Middle East. And there was a, sort of a misinformation campaign that I was supporting Assad. That is not true. I have never spoken in support of Assad, nor in support of Russia and its human rights record. We've not, shall we say, I try to avoid using inflammatory language because at the end of the day, we have to negotiate with our adversaries as well as our allies. And in fact, I was in Moscow for a global press event. And as part of that, I was calling out Vladimir Putin for his bombing campaign against Syria. So it's just not true that we have been on the side of dictators.
And I hear you there. And I know that people watching will say, well, you made those comments in Russia, but not at the table where you were photographed with Putin. Or you are giving this viewpoint, and yet there's a video circulating online right now about you not feeling comfortable calling China's campaign against Uyghur Muslims there a genocide, or feeling like you know enough to speak about what's happening. How do you respond to that criticism?
Yes. So first of all, Vladimir Putin walked into that room. And by the way, he was listening to my address to the conference that day. He said as much in his speech, that he was listening to what people were saying, and he found that interesting. He was at the table only for a few minutes, speaking only Russian, surrounded by his coterie. And he then went up and gave a speech in Russian and then walked out. I would have loved to have talked with him, but I was able to put my message out to him by being a part of the forum and having about 10 or 15 minutes where I could basically communicate the key issues for me. And those were that we need a ceasefire. We need to end all the bombing campaigns in the Middle East. We need to abandon nuclear weapons, and we need a global Green New Deal. So I was by no means shy about our mission and our issues, and hoping, very much to be able to open dialogue for further communication on this. As far as Bibi Netanyahu goes, he will not dialogue. I mean, he is the opposite of dialogue and diplomacy. I don't mince words about Bibi Netanyahu. He needs to be called out as the worst war criminal walking the earth at the moment.
Dr. Stein, I think that is the point. I'm going to move on in just a bit, but because you don't mince words, and that is what your supporters love about you, that is what some of your detractors are saying is the problem here. Very briefly, can you touch on the Uyghur issue? Because that's what I'm seeing making the rounds amongst Muslim Americans who are unhappy and who want to give you more full-throated support, but can't.
So let me say, I'm glad that we are not funding the human rights abuses and the crimes being committed against the Uyghurs. We're not funding that. We are funding the genocide of the people of Gaza. So it deserves the full focus of our attention. I now have a running mate who himself is very familiar with these issues. So I'm in the process of being informed. He has certainly taken a stand, an unabashed stand. And we are, he is advising me and I'm coming up to speed. It's very hard to know, through the U.S. Mainstream media, what is the truth. And we have seen so much death, disaster, genocide committed because of the power of the U.S. war machine and the power of the U.S. propaganda machine. So as Greens, we're always very guarded about taking these accusations at face value. So that is why we want to give them full review. And now that we have someone who's very close to this issue, I look forward to coming out with a statement soon that will help bring my part of the agenda up to speed on the Uyghurs, as we have already done in clarifying our position on Syria and on Russia, for that matter. But what we have complete agency over is not just the words that we use, but actually the slaughter that is being conducted. So this is our first priority is to end this slaughter. And, it's not enough to open up the delivery of humanitarian aid, as the Harris Biden administration sometimes calls for, that's not enough because that aid is going to be destroyed as it has been destroyed. We also have to stop the genocide. It's not enough to feed the people who are then being targeted and bombed and, and buried under rubble. We have to stop burying them under the rubble as well as providing them food and medical care. That can happen on day one.
More with Dr. Jill Stein after the break. Dr. Stein, I want to talk about how you get to day one, and a topic that most third-party candidates probably hate the most, the idea of being a spoiler candidate. So let's talk swing states. A poll that came out last week, conducted by the New York Times and Siena College, has you polling at 2% nationally. But there are other polls that have you doing very well with Arab and Muslim communities and voters because of your stance in Gaza. And that's especially in key battleground states like Michigan. Now, you have heard this a lot, but many feel you cost Hillary Clinton the election in 2016 because of small margins in these swing states, and that you are therefore the reason that we had a President Trump. Many people are saying that again. So I want to hear from you. Are votes for you in these battleground states going to decide this election?
So first of all, just to clear the record here, people who voted for my campaign in 2016 were otherwise not voting. So we provided a reason for people to come to the polls. We were not taking votes away. So it is misinformation, disinformation, and it is disempowering and disrespectful and anti-democratic, let me say, this smear campaign that says that the Democratic Party owns your votes or that the Republican Party owns your votes. They don't own your votes. They have to earn your votes. They haven't earned your votes, which is why Kamala Harris has lost the support of the Muslim American community. She doesn't want to talk about that. In fact, there are also 2 polls from about 2 weeks ago. And what those 2 different polls showed was that, in fact, Kamala Harris has already lost these votes. And in fact, we're not drawing down on Kamala Harris's vote. We're drawing down on Donald Trump's vote because we're providing people who have already decided they're not going to vote for someone committing genocide, someone who has murdered dozens of their relatives. And we have one candidate who's actively in the White House overseeing this genocide, and another, Donald Trump, who has said, let's hurry up and finish the job. There's nothing to lose and everything to gain, both in terms of foreign policy, but also in terms of the assault on our democracy. You can look at any of the issues where the Democrats pretend to be the lesser evil, but when you actually dig down at the details, they are not the lesser evil.
But Dr. Stein, you said something. You said something that I know that some listeners are going to take issue with, and you said that there is nothing to lose, only something to gain. Now, on both sides, that will not be the same take. You have the Democratic side who say there is everything to lose here, and that you are taking votes away from Kamala Harris. So, of course, exit polls are not scientific. We can there's no way to know that 100% of those voters just were not going to vote in 2016. We don't know that again this year, but that is what the Democratic Party says, that you are ushering in a Trump presidency.
That is what they will always say. The parties of abolition were called spoilers because they dared to challenge the institution of slavery. So this is what power does. Power will, attempt to hang on to power. And the Democratic Party in particular, we know that Donald Trump disrupted the election by trying to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power. Well, the Democrats do that in advance of the election by stripping the election of opposition candidates. That is authoritarianism. That is the tyranny that the U.S. complains about in other countries. They are doing it here.
You have a lot of criticism for the Democratic Party, arguably rightfully so, because of the attack ads they put out against you. But one of the criticisms about you is that you don't talk enough about Trump and the threats that he poses. And so I want to frame this in a way that's really personal for people who are actually fearful of what could happen under another Trump presidency. They cite things like his role in inciting the January 6th insurrection, his plans to deport millions of undocumented migrants in a military operation, the threats people already face and will continue to face on reproductive rights. What would your message be to those people who say this is existential? Foreign policy aside, this is what we're facing here in the U.S.
Absolutely. And, as I just mentioned, it's Donald Trump who interferes with the peaceful transfer of power, and the Democrats do it on the front end. So it's not like we don't criticize Republicans. We absolutely do. In fact, one of the things we always say is that people are mad at the Democrats because they make promises and then they break them. But the Republicans never make promises in the first place, so they don't kind of inspire the same kind of anger that the Democrats do. And let me just, to that point, what moved the big shift of the electorate into the Republican Party happened after the 2008 Wall Street crash, where the Democrats in 2 houses of Congress and the Obama administration, they bailed out Wall Street. So there's enormous reason here, which is driving the shift of the electorate. It's not that the Republicans are solving any of this. It's just that the electorate is very angry at the Democrats for having betrayed them. But to your point about the deportations, there was a young Hispanic woman who came to one of our house parties the other night, and she was like overjoyed to learn about our approach to immigration. She said, nobody knows about this in my community. They're all voting for Donald Trump. And I said, well, why Trump? She said, because it's Joe Biden who's been deporting our community. And this is actually true. In spite of Trump's horrific rhetoric throughout, it's the Democrats who've always been the deporters in chief on reproductive rights. Both Barack Obama and Joe Biden came into office having promised that codifying Roe would be the first thing that they would do, but they never did it when they had the majorities to do it. So do not believe the propaganda that's telling you that, that Donald Trump is the greater evil. In fact, we have 2 greater evils in this election, and our job is to vote for the greater good.
So, Dr. Stein, I have one final question, but I will preface it by saying usually people say don't read the comments, but it is really remarkable that under each of your media appearances on YouTube, at least, the comments are, from my viewpoint, I didn't know about this, and now I'm voting for Jill Stein and Butch Weer. So I want to talk about how you galvanize that after the election. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. People will have checked a box for you or for someone else. There will be a result that will be, as polls show, unlikely to make you president. So stepping aside from electoral policies and electoral politics, let's think about 2025, your own, should we say, Project 2025, either under a President Harris or a President Trump. How do you keep that momentum and that movement going?
And let me say, this is not new for us. We as the Green Party do not go away. And this is why we've been able to build. In my first race in 2012, we got 500,000 votes, something like that. And then my 2016 race, it was more like 1.5 million. So we actually tripled our vote. Because we are building, we don't go away. We have over 150 elected officials at the local level. We've had over 1,500 elected officials. We are a decentralized political party that is people-powered across the country. In the course of this race, we have had many new communities stepping up and creating Green Party chapters and running Green Party candidates. And I very much look forward to working with activists all over the country so we can stand up together and we can keep the momentum going. Because no matter what happens in this election, we have a genocide to stop. We have an empire to dismantle. We have a democracy to reestablish. We have migrants to defend. The biggest solution to the immigration problem is to stop causing it in the first place, with endless wars and regime change operations, and also with the war on drugs, which empowers the cartels to create their violence, which is driving people here. All politics is local, and we are a grassroots campaign. We grow from the bottom up. The American people are really hungry for a people-powered politics that is of, by, and for us. Together, we are unstoppable, and we really look forward to working with everyone who has been mobilized in this campaign to continue the fight.
Dr. Jill Stein, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing the Green Party's take with us.
It's been really an honor to be with you, Malika. Thank you so very much.
And that's The Take. What are your thoughts on Jill Stein's candidacy? Let us know in the comments below. I'm always checking in, so let's keep the conversation going. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to give it a like so more people can find it.